Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to begin looking at the difference between short run and long run costs. So we will focus on trying to make sure we're clear on the difference between short run and long run. And we'll discuss a concept known as economies of scale and discuss sunk costs and why they are not relevant to economic decision making. So first, we start with a reminder that firms sort of operate under two different time periods. One is the short run, and the other is the long run. In the short run, at least one input is fixed. You've made some sort of decision that has locked you in, something like rent for a location. Maybe you're paying a lease for 12 months. During those 12 months, you're stuck where you are. You can't change location. But after 12 months are up, that input is no longer fixed, it is variable, and that's where we are at the long run. The long run is when all inputs can be changed. And because inputs are fully variable in the long run, we have choices to make about the combination of inputs we want to use to produce the amount of output that we expect from the market. And so firms have options before them, and they need to make a decision about what in combination of inputs they will employ to keep their costs as low as possible and in order to maximize their total profit. And the decisions they're going to make are going to be based largely on how much they're expecting to have to produce moving forward. So we might have a situation like the one in this graph where the firm is trying to decide between employing one machine to make salsa or two machines to make salsa. In the short run, they're stuck, right? They may have one machine, that's it. In the long run, they can add one or two, and they're trying to decide what's the right decision for them to make. If they have one machine, we have an average total cost curve that indicates what the cost will be based on output if I have one machine. If I have a second machine, I have a different set of costs. The second machine is adding more fixed costs, but it's also making my workers more productive. So we have a slightly different cost curve. And so which machine we choose to employ, how many of them we choose to employ, is dictated based on the average total cost curve. I'm going to look as a firm and decide based on how many units I'm going to produce, whether or not one machine makes sense or two makes sense when I'm in the long run. So in this case, if I'm only having to produce two cases of salsa, then it would make sense to only have one machine because at an output of two, the average total cost is lower for one machine than it is for two. If, however, I'm making 8 cases of salsa into the future, then it would make sense for me as the firm to lower my costs by employing a second machine because at a unit of 8, the average total costs are lower when I'm having two machines being used rather than one. It turns out that there are more than just two options for most firms. There's almost an infinite number of combinations of inputs that firms could employ to produce output, especially when in the long run everything is flexible and I can employ as many of either inputs that I want. And so we need to sort of figure out in the long run what combination of inputs gives me the lowest total cost. So that's where the long run average total cost curve comes in. We recognize that there is one combination of inputs that will minimize my cost of production for each level of output. So on the graph, we've got three options, ATC3, ATC6, and ATC9. Each one of them presents a minimum cost for a single quantity of output. So if I'm producing 3 cases of salsa, then the ATC3 option is the lowest average total cost of the 3 options available to me when I'm producing 3 cases. Uh, as you can see, at point A, that's the minimum of ATC3, or it should be, just the way it's drawn. Um, ATC6 has a much higher average total cost, and ATC9 has an even higher average total cost. However, if we're at 6 units, then ATC6 is the cheapest, um, as opposed to 3 and 9. So there's always one combination that's sort of optimal given the output we need. The long run average total cost curve basically takes the minimum point of the ATC curve for the lowest cost of production for each unit and pieces those minimum points together into a single curve that we call the long run average total cost curve. And so this sort of helps us identify, based on my expected output, what combination of inputs should I use when I have the choice of deciding what the combination is going to be to lower my total costs. And that long run average total cost curve has a couple of zones or areas that are of interest to us. One area is where it is decreasing, where we see the average total costs falling as I increase output. This area of the long run average total cost curve that is downward sloping is where we see increasing returns to scale. What increasing returns to scale means is that as I increase my inputs, maybe I double my inputs, I get a larger increase in output. I double my inputs, I get 3 times the output. When we have increasing returns to scale, we begin to see average total costs dropping. And we get increasing returns to scale typically because of specialization. As we get bigger, we're able to have workers, particularly labor, focus on specific jobs, and they specialize at those jobs and then become increasingly efficient, which means that they can produce more goods in the same amount of time, and that lowers our costs. So as the average total cost curve, long run average total cost curve is decreasing, we're seeing increasing returns to scale. You might also hear the term increasing economies of scale. Economies of scale occur when there are increasing returns to scale. Economies of scale, that root word economies is the same word we would use for something being economical. When things are economical, they are cheaper to operate. So a car that gets 60 miles to the gallon is more economical than a car that only gets 12 miles to the gallon because it requires less gas and therefore it's cheaper to operate. So economies of scale and increasing returns to scale go together and are found where the long run average total cost curve is downward sloping. Where the long run average total cost curve hits its minimum, we say there are constant returns to scale. That is, we double our inputs, we get double the output. So basically no change in average total cost. Beyond that point, the average total cost curve, the long run average total cost curve, will begin to bend upward and slope upward. That upward sloping portion is exhibiting what we call decreasing returns to scale. With decreasing returns to scale, we will double our inputs and only get 1.2 times the output. So we're doubling the costs of our inputs and not recouping that in terms of output. And we also use the phrase diseconomies of scale. And that dis prefix goes with a lot of words we're familiar with. Dissatisfied means not satisfied. So diseconomies of scale means not economical. And when you're not economical, you're increasingly more expensive, which is why the long run average total cost curve is bending upwards. Now you'll see this typically when firms start getting too big. As you grow from a little company to a big company, you do enjoy the benefits of scale, of being able to specialize and grow more efficient. But you reach a point where the firm gets too big and it takes more effort and time to coordinate activities, and that lowers the productivity of your workers and causes your costs to rise. So there is such a thing as too big for companies. So on that long run average total cost curve, every point from the minimum to the left is called the economies of scale portion. And everything from the minimum to the right is the diseconomies of scale. Now let's take a moment and think about another concept that comes with cost, and that is sunk cost. Imagine for a minute that you've gone to the movies and you paid $15 to see this movie, and it turns out that within 10 minutes you realize this is the worst movie you have ever seen. Or imagine that you've spent $20 to go to a buffet to eat dinner, and you've already eaten about a half a plate in when you realize that you're already feeling kind of full, and you start regretting your decision. So in both cases, you're sitting there thinking, well, geez, what should I do? Should I continue to sit and watch this terrible movie? I did pay $15. I'd hate to have wasted $15, so I guess I'll sit and watch the movie. Or you might be sitting there thinking, well, I paid $20 for this buffet. I want to get my money's worth. I hate to have spent $20 on dinner and I only get about $5 worth of benefit. So I guess I should just power through and keep eating. And that's typical thinking for a lot of people. They say, well, I spent this money, I'd hate to waste it. But in economics, we call these situations sunk costs because that money is spent. We cannot get it back. And because I can't get it back, because I can't undo the past, I only make decisions about what's ahead of me. So in economics, decision making is always based on forward thinking. What's in the future? And so if I paid $15 for a terrible movie, I should be free to get up and leave. I have better uses of my time. We have opportunity costs because we don't have unlimited time. I can't afford to sit and waste my time in a terrible movie. Yeah, I paid $15 for it, but if I can get more than $15 worth of enjoyment doing something else, and if the movie is really, really terrible, the odds of me being able to find something that makes me happy are pretty high, then I should say the $15 is a loss, chalk it up as a loss, move on with life, and make a decision moving forward to look at what can be the best use of my time now. And the same thing with the buffet. Yeah, I paid $20, but I'm not getting it back. Eating more and more food to make myself feel sicker and sicker and sicker just because I spent $20 is not a good justification. It just makes me worse off. If the goal is to make myself better off, to make myself as well off as I possibly can, to maximize my utility and my happiness, then I don't make decisions based on what I did in the past based on regret. Instead, I sit there, acknowledge that I'm full, that maybe I made a poor choice and I won't come back here for dinner again, and then move forward in life doing things that are adding to my total utility. So when it comes to economics, we ignore things known as sunk costs, things that are not recoverable and that we did in the past. And for our purposes, sunk costs are fixed costs. I had to pay those costs whether I was operating or not, whether I opened my doors or closed them. It doesn't matter. I still had to pay them. They're fixed, and therefore I do not make decisions based on those expenses. I had to pay for my rent, for my store, and so I don't just open my doors and pay people to sit there when there are no customers simply because I'm paying the rent. I just accept that I have to pay the rent and I cut my losses there and move forward. So when it comes to decision making, always look at the variable costs moving forward, ignore the fixed costs from the past. We'll talk some more next time about profit, and I will talk to you then.